Competitive play is a near ubiquitous feature among multiplayer titles released these days, and it's changing our games and how we play them in ways we've been overlooking for quite some time. Player versus player gameplay is definitionally competitive, but when I say ranked or competitive play from here on out, it's going to be in reference to games that include meta systems that track and reward players for victories or punish them for defeats. The idea behind a ranked mode is actually something I quite support when executed for the right reasons. At a very basic level, playing ranked means that you won't go easy on your opponents and they won't go easy on you. There's an expectation that every player will play to their very best and victories are earned. You can observe your skill level in some objective capacity relative to others. And a well-designed competitive environment doesn't just stomp anyone who isn't good enough to keep up, it provides feedback and a roadmap for improvement. It places the emphasis on sharpening your skills as a player and building a community with like-minded players. There's a lot of good that separating communities into competitive and non-competitive play does. Many games have conflicts arise between players that are really just a conflict of playstyles and expectations, and you only need to prowl some D&D forums to see that this isn't even an issue constrained to video games, it's a constant of all gaming. If you expect a hard time, you won't be as frustrated when you're met with one. But in spite of all the positive things that competitive play can do, it's not effectively doing any of them. Even if ranked hadn't become an expectation out of any game that features PvP gameplay, regardless of whether they have the community size to support it, or the game has even been released yet, the ones that it appears most prominently within have some pretty significant pitfalls. I'm going to be discussing and referring to most prominently League of Legends, Overwatch, and Rainbow Six Siege, but there are countless more besides that most of what I say will apply to. These are the games that I believe set the standard when it comes to competitive play, but my research is by no means comprehensive. I'm certain there are other games that did it earlier, better, or both. But when I think modern competitive titles, these are the games that first come to mind, and so will be my reference points for the rest of the video. To call competition fair is a bit reductive in my eye. Even in traditional sports, people of different body types can be advantaged or disadvantaged, while in video games, competition is often a matter of reflex, to which factors like connection speed can lie comfortably outside the control of a single player depending on their geography. But when games have meta systems that gate off significant portions of gameplay behind paywalls, the integrity of the competition is undermined. Prior to the widespread adoption of competitive, multiplayer titles at least had the decency to not pretend they were fair. This certainly isn't universal. If you've bought Overwatch, then you don't have to make another in-game purchase ever in order to have access to anything that affects gameplay, although the skins can sometimes obfuscate character silhouettes and cause them to blend into their environments in such a way that could conceivably be considered an advantage. And this is true of almost any game that monetizes cosmetic items, save for fighters. Though the quote advantage seems to be considered too marginal to matter if existent at all. In any case, locking gameplay and strategies behind paywalls or time sinks is antithetical to an environment where players are expected to engage in fair competition. If soccer players played by different rules in the same match based on how much they paid or how long they've been playing, everyone would call the game what it is: rigged. But instead of frustrations being directed where they're deserved, competitive causes players to direct it at each other.
Use some help! Yeah, I'm not playing hero if my DPS don't know how to do DPS. So we're gonna have two DPS that refuse to switch off a DPS and we're gonna lose because of it. Good to know. Yeah, I'm getting shot by 7 people, by the way. Watch this match gone. Battles to this one worthless nigger.
Toxicity is a professional term for negative player behavior, which really just means bullying. Every game in every genre has jerks, but competitive games don't just mean more toxicity, they're a force multiplier. Players can find themselves being the target of harassment for something as simple as not adhering to the most strict metagame or playing just to have fun. Power is universal. In any game with choices, something will be stronger than something else. That's not an argument to ignore bad balance. And while fun is subjective, it's also the goal of a well-designed competitive environment to create overlap between the fun playstyles and most effective playstyles. So if the designer has done their job well, playing for fun should mean playing to win. But there's only so many choices which can be the strongest. And that also doesn't mean that the rest can't still be a fun way to mix up play. In competitive games, information about the strongest strategy is ravenously sought after, with multiple large YouTube channels per game dedicated to finding and highlighting them. In this environment, experienced players have fewer than normal options for gameplay because all below a certain threshold for power are basically invitations for losses. The culture of a competitive game adapts so fast that entire playstyles can be rendered impossible. Not just because of the higher player skill across the board, but bringing the conversation back to player toxicity, because of how the community reacts to a perceived suboptimal strategy. And perceived is an incredibly important word here, because most players are modeling their power rankings over a version of the game that only the smallest minority of high-level players actually play. And after all of that, the best designer in the world can have an idea what the game should look like when played competitively, only to find player ingenuity, or malice, engaging with the game in ways that they never conceived of. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. Competitive almost codifies this process. There's a long history of player exploits being graduated to full mechanics because of competitive players who look to optimize their gameplay and eke out every advantage they can. For many of these mechanics in many of these games, that's a great thing. But in just as many, I'd be willing to argue the opposite. But which player exploits are good mechanics and which ones are bad isn't the point. Rather, it's simply to say that competitive gameplay incentivizes players to exploit those mechanics in the first place, regardless of whether or not they're fair. In the tabletop card game Magic the Gathering, there are several cards which are banned in nearly every format of play, because if they weren't, players can conceivably win the game before it even starts. Even with these bans, competitive players have an enormous pool from which to choose cards that break the game wide open, and yet in one of the most popular and most easily broken formats, Commander, they make up the minority of players. Because while a single opponent format focuses its efforts on player skills, a multiplayer format is more concerned with socialization and fun. This shift in focus lowers the barrier to entry enormously, despite the game's convoluted to the point of unintelligible mechanics. Again, none of this is to say that playing competitively is bad, but all of the problems with player toxicity and invalidated playstyles are, unlike in Magic, not constrained to the competitive or ranked modes. There's no clear separation between the two. When competitive play is included in games, the problems cascade through the entirety of the game. I'll condense and repeat this point simply because I think it's the most important. Ranked modes mean more toxicity in all levels of play. And it goes further than being bullied over suboptimal playstyles or poor performance in game. You'll find yourself in the crosshair for anything and everything, having a funny name, not being a high enough rank, being a non-male player. Because competitive games aren't actually about setting expectations and fostering healthy competition. If they were, they'd be universally placing a greater emphasis on the process of improvement, which includes systems that teach new players how to actually play the game. If you're lucky, a friend will pull you in and show you the ropes, but otherwise, the real tutorials for these games are half-hour plus multi-part YouTube videos made by independent creators. That's what it takes to learn how to play right. And despite the immense efforts of the communities these games form in spite of their live service models, the direction is intent on routinely invalidating enormous swaths of that effort. Balance patches change, add, or remove mechanics, sometimes so foundationally that over time the game can barely be recognized. The toll that keeping up takes is felt by every member of the community. Players have to routinely read excruciatingly detailed change lists, trying to retain information from which resorting to whatever meta becomes a respite. Content creators can experience burnout from having to research and present quality content at an expedient rate, to which resorting to news, speculatory updates, or just low-effort streaming becomes an easy solution. And developers are forced to constantly react and sink enormous amounts of time and effort into specifically gameplay balance, leaving other important aspects such as story, character, or custom editors pitifully underdeveloped or absent entirely. And for all of this, competitive doesn't result in anything tangible for the player. Sure, you get a good feeling when you top some lists, some special skins or profile banners, and maybe even some currency you can spend in the game stores. But you're not going to wind up on a world stage from getting to Grandmaster on the PS4. You're not going to get anything. Which invites me to wonder if the pressure is all really worth it. If competitive isn't actively improving our experience, then why is it there? We can answer this question by looking to the live service model these games follow. A live service game is one that post-launch is designed to be supported for an indeterminate amount of time and serve as a recurring revenue stream for the developer and publisher. The specifics vary, but typically they're online-only games that feature seasonal or regular updates, limited time events, and in the case of competitive multiplayer, ranked modes. Not all live service games include ranked systems, but all games that include ranked systems are live service games. And knowing this, ranked and all of the problems that accompany it serves a crucial function: player retention. Getting harassed over not knowing the meta does incentivize you to learn what the meta is. So you're driven to a YouTube channel, a channel which has to regularly release new content as the game changes, and you see the badges, skins, and banners that they have displayed over their profile, and teem with envy. Maybe you get recommended to some professional games, and then the commercial for the next biggest tournament drops, and it ends with you in your room pressing play, because you could be the next pro. It's all bullshit, of course. It's an aggressively market-researched and focus-tested strategy meant to reel you in and exploit compulsive personalities, eventually attempting to get you to open up your wallet. Tournaments, professional play, and competitive scenes didn't ever need ranked modes to bloom. They grew organically, from the players. And I'd love to see how much more accessible these scenes could become with the support of developers. But for the moment, I think they're doing more harm than good. Thanks for watching.